the big drop captures all the headlines, right? Because it's one of those things, if you just look at the variables, Fed funds rate doesn't change, balance sheet policy doesn't really change. It's just wait and see. Nothing ever happens type of thing. The money shot here was Powell answering in the press conference that he intends to stay on as Fed governor after his term as Fed chair ends on May 15th. So from a parliamentary procedure standpoint here, the way this board process is going to work, Jerome Powell has dug down. He says, I'm going to stay on and I'm going to hold that board of governors seat, which technically he can hold that until his term expires in January 2028. So his actual seat he's in started in 2014, and it finally that occupation will end in 2028 is how this works. But he won't be chairman anymore. He'll just be one of seven. So what happens here, what Trump is going to have to do, and the White House is going to have to do to get their new chairman nominee in place, they have to nominate Kevin Warsh, who is the choice, first as Fed chair, but then they also had to nominate him to that board of governors seat that currently Stephen J. Moran is occupying, but isn't renominated for. So it's an open seat. Kevin Warsh is going to go into that. Stephen Moran will take that hat off and the dual hat like he was prior to serving on the Fed Board of Governors on that Adriana Kugler seat after she resigned in August. His role was economic advisor to the 47th administration. He'll go back to wearing that hat in his full-time job, is my assumption. Warsh will plug into that seat, and then Warsh will be he'll be nominated, confirmed on both, get that seat, and then confirm in that chair. But what this amounts to in the boardroom battle, it's a fight over those 7 board of governors seats, which ultimately those 7 seats control the majority of the 12 votes for monetary policy on the FOMC, and then the regional banks control the minority position with 5. So you see 2 battlefronts kind of opening up. This is the most unorganized mess of a state I think the Fed board or the FOMC has ever been in, and we'll dig into the history here. If it's not an all-time high in disorder, it's very close. And granted, that's 100 years, or no, FOMC was like a Roosevelt era 1930s invention. So it's like 90 years of history and my understanding on it. We'll let the fact checkers dig that up. But high degree of disorder here and political disarray. Now, how this is being presented in the mainstream, financial reporting with Jerome Powell's decision yesterday is, pretty much following a general line that this is a Powell versus Trump story. Jerome Powell is standing up to, Donald Trump, king, and he's standing in the way of an overreaching executive branch, all of that. My read on this, that's not correct. And for me to say I'm distrustful of the mainstream media and the narratives that they spin these stories with. Most of you who've been watching us for any more than a few weeks will know that that's something I tend to do to question narratives, so no one will be surprised. But I think that presentation that this is a proxy battle, Jerome Powell standing up as the noble David to Trump's bully Goliath, that is it's not even oversimplification. It's a twisting of reality, in my opinion, and understanding of the power dynamics that is serving someone's end. Now, when I get into saying the someone, let's dive deep into the background of the power factions and capital bases that Jerome Powell and Kevin Warsh distinctly represent. So we'll start with Jerome Powell because he's status quo, right? He's the legacy incumbent Fed chair. Jerome Powell's background, while he looks very similar to Kevin Warsh on the face of it. They're both lawyers, served on Wall Street. Um, Jerome Powell notably worked as legal attorney for Carlyle Group's industrials division for a time in the late 90s into 2000s. We've discussed previous episodes. Um, Kevin Warsh did the same thing. He earned his Wall Street chops as a practitioner, working on M&A as an investment banking lawyer for Morgan Stanley in his pre-public policy Fed career. After that, he served in the Bush White House, Bush II, right? The George W. Bush White House is my understanding, and then was nominated to a Fed Board of Governors seat in the late George W. Bush era and exited early 2010s in the post GFC, basically a disagreement with the board and its broader policy and the monetary policy framework to addressing or getting out of the aftermath of the 2008 global financial crisis. Okay, so that similarity in my mind is where this and background is where this ends. So if you look at in terms of wealth legacy and approach to markets, this is where the divergence starts to become crystal clear. So Jerome Powell, while he does come from like a legacy American stock lineage background, he's not in the same kind of upper tier hierarchy that Kevin Warsh comes from. My understanding, this has been widely reported in the media during the confirmation processes, but there's no secret about this. Kevin Warsh is publicly worn this on his sleeve. There's no getting away from it. He's a member of the highest of the high net worth type of America. He married into the Estee Lauder family fortune. That is distinct, though, in my mind, from a different class of nouveau riche. Well, and I'll talk about it from the technocratic faction, if you will, in the post-war bureaucracy kind of framework that we talk about, which I think Jerome Powell aligns with much more closely. So start to set one more dimension here, the approach to capital markets and monetary policy. Kevin Warsh notably disagrees with the kind of, call it the PhD standard consensus approach to Fed governance and monetary policy when it comes to things like the new Keynesian economic framework, Phillips curve modeling, what else? QE, like just basically management by ivory tower academics, where the map is very clearly not the territory, right? And I'd say that's how Jerome Powell still kind of aligns himself and buys into monetary policy management according to that kind of incumbent technocratic framework. He's notably raised that he disagrees, or at some points you can tease out some hints that he doesn't trust these models. But if you see the alignment here between that kind of old guard and then the to classify this thing as the opposition to that framework, that is like a key dimension on the different capital bases and power bases that Jerome Powell and Kevin Warsh represent. And to make this more clear, I'll just highlight one more kind of observation that I see. So Kevin Warsh doesn't agree, like he doesn't invest his wealth, let's say, in the classical framework or the what would you just call it, like the Markowitz modern portfolio theory framework, or modern monetary theory kind of framework, where you just say, hey, you invest in passive index funds in the markets and then deploy into 60/40 stocks and bonds, that sort of thing. Kevin Warsh sees investment and capital allocation more in terms of actually running a business and thinks about this from an entrepreneur's first framework or the capital owner's kind of framework on deploying investment into risk from like a first principles position, as opposed to just, hey, you take the efficient markets hypothesis as generally true, deploy into the market broadly, and accept beta as a true measure of risk, and bonds, U.S. Treasuries as your assumed risk-free rate, dial the sliding scale, accordingly. That's a huge divergence, and I don't think I did a good job explaining it. But those very clearly separate these two groups. That, like, if you actually think about this story deeply, you can see it. There's two separate camps there, and they are represented by their apex predator here. Or think about this as like trial by combat. The champion in the central banking representation here on each approach's view, or each of these factions' view, is who they nominate for their vision of the exemplar, prototypical central banker par excellence.
Right.
That faction I talked about of the legacy technocratic class, that's Jerome Powell is their champion, and this other class, I don't know, we call them like earned wealth. They earn their wealth through actually running businesses, providing goods and services to the real economy, things that people demonstrate a need or like a demonstrated desire to part with money in exchange for said good, or service which they show they value. That approach is entirely different to that technocratic kind of mindset, and it reveals itself in how you think the FOMC or a central bank should conduct monetary policy. So their central bank champion that they've proposed here is Kevin Warsh. He's been on the sidelines since 2012, 2011, when he said, "I'm out of here. I'm not going to deal with this path that it's very clear that the boardroom power consensus has shifted out of that camp's favor." And was going to go along this Ben Bernanke, Janet Yellen, QE focused approach, technocratic approach. So he sat it out for 14 years. And as you think in markets, right? Look at a chart, they go through advances and retracements, et cetera. That time for consolidation and the horse trading, the technocrats had their way post 2008 up until, I don't know if we have broken out of it for sure, but there's a huge tug of war going on in this boardroom battle. What we're seeing right here, Trump himself, if you remember, he nominated Jerome Powell as his Fed chair to replace Janet Yellen. I want to say in 2018, it was 2017 or 2018. And he was advised to do that by some faction, and you could hear it in his comments. He was like, "Great advice, guys," like sarcastically. "Thanks for that one." But he's now, Trump himself has now aligned. It's very clear, there's this choice here of the technocratic establishment, or this other choice here of your, you call them upper class, right? They come from the upper tiers of wealth in society. Yeah. It's different, though, in my mind. That's not a strike. Wealth is not a strike against you. And I think this is a mindset we need to get across. What I think the American public are disgruntled with, upset with, et cetera, is wealth obtained through invalid, inappropriate means, cheating, et cetera, let's just say as an example, waging fraud to run a daycare, overbilling, the federal government for some, policy junket just because it's there, and you won't get detected. I think that type of wealth extraction is what the broader American public is upset with. It's very clearly unfair, and one camp of those people, like that is the separator. Is how I'll put it. I didn't crystallize this perfectly for the audience, but I hope it gets through what I'm saying. If you obtain your fortune by delivering, makeup and products that women around the world want, in my view, and I think in the general public's view, we're happy for that person who makes wealth in that type of way. You can say things for any product that people desire and find value of.
Right.
When you're doing it based on insider trading or using your own internal information or access to power or power itself to monetize and enrich yourself. I think that's a clearly different thing, and that's where a lot of this dissatisfaction with the politics, with the political situation as it stands in the United States is really deriving from. All right, so I'll leave that there, but I think that's key. I want to just put a pin on it. This isn't a Trump versus Powell proxy war. The media is going to present this as Powell is your hero. He's standing up to this bully Trump, who is operating as a king, as a tyrant, outside of his executive authority, which, in my opinion, doesn't really hold up to reality. He's actually limited in his executive authority, and he's limited by a Congress that is specifically dragging its feet from actually doing anything. So there's very clearly limitations on his exercise of power, as far as what the Constitution permits for the executive. All right, we'll leave that there. But this is a Powell versus Warsh proxy war, in my opinion, is how I think it needs to be framed, and that represents the broader conflict for control of the steering wheel of the FOMC, which is really just one proxy war. We see in the same process playing out across pretty much every major institution that the United States political order, economic order, all of that is really built upon. So when we talk about the institutional crisis, all of that, this is the elephant in the room going on. It is much bigger than a Trump thing, and to just put Trump in as the object to beat up as the piñata in the mainstream media to cover up these underlying problems. Don't fall for that trap, is my opinion, as you read through this process of the Fed Board of Governors shuffling that's going to take place here in rapid order over the next 30 to 45 days.